everybody, I'm Nora Burrows. Today I want to do a mini trunk show. I'm going to show you 3 quilts. Here's the first one back here. I'll obviously give you a closer look, but these are 3 quilts that I've finished recently in the last couple of months that I just haven't had a chance to share with you all, so I thought I would do that today. This one back here is called Men on Point, and I will tell you why. Usually with these trunk shows I start kind of farther back so you can see the full quilt first. But for this one, I wanted to start a little bit closer so that you could kind of see this novelty fabric here. So I bought this novelty fabric and I tea-dyed it because when I initially bought the fabric, it was pure white as white could be. With these other kind of hues, these more muted hues, the white was just too stark. Let me show you, I think I have some remnants of the initial fabric. Let me show you. So here is the initial fabric, and then here's the fabric after I tea-dyed it. This stripe was also a pure white and was part of the tea dyeing as well. As you can see, the men are diagonal. They're not straight up and down. So let me back up, show you the full quilt, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. I have it hanging lengthwise here, as you can see, instead of vertical, only because it's easier for me to show it to you that way. But the men are on the diagonal, whether it's hanging vertical or lengthwise. Now, when I was at my quilt retreat, I made the majority of this quilt at my quilt retreat. And at the quilt retreat, I was making these log cabin blocks. So I had already made the stars, the square with the stars in the middle, and I was adding on these log cabin pieces. So each of these is a log cabin block. And I had initially been making them to go, up and down, so that all the men would be straight up and down. And as I was making them, I can't remember what I was complaining about, but I was complaining about something to the woman next to me, and she said, well, why don't you put them on point? And I said, yeah, but then the men are gonna be on a diagonal. And she was like, so what? So I started thinking about it. I was like, well, I'll make all of the log cabins first, and then I'll decide. At the retreat, there was a woman going around just for fun, naming people's quilts. And so she was talking to me, and she said, well, if you have the blocks going straight up and down, you should call it men straight up. And if you have the quilts on point, you should call the quilt men on point. So this is men on point. The quilt is called men on point, which I think is just very funny. And I'll always remember that, men on point versus men straight up. So this is a really fun one. I love the colors, very manly. I can't actually see any man snuggling up with this quilt with all these like gentlemen pictured, on it. But I love it. I think it's cool. I think it would even be a cool wall hanging, but it's pretty large. I did very minimal quilting on it. I did stitch in the ditch for the log cabins, and then I did stitch in the ditch around the stars. And then you can kind of see on the diagonal here, I did these lines, and then in these middle triangles, I also did a line for each of the triangles, but very minimal quilting. I really wanted the colors here to be able to stand out. I really wanted to be able to see the men clearly, so I didn't want a lot of quilting. And I wanted it to be a little bit puffier, and sometimes if there's too much quilting, it starts to get very flat. So I struggled with the outer pieces here, with the oranges up here and the browns in the corner, only because I didn't really have enough of either of them to kind of fully do it in the background, which is what I had initially envisioned. I initially envisioned the whole background being this orange, so this being the orange and those being the orange, which I also didn't love because I had already used those fabrics in the log cabin pieces and I wanted something different, but I was trying to use what I had and there was just no other fabric that I owned that was working. So they say that the best thing for your quilt artistically is to run out of fabric. And I think in this case it's true because I actually think the quilt is better with these 2 different fabrics than it would have been to have that kind of burnt orange color being for the entire background. Let's take a look at the next quilt. This quilt here is very different from the last one. I love this quilt. I also made this one at the same quilt retreat. I didn't make both of them in full, but I worked on both of them at that retreat. And each one of those 2-inch squares is, hand pieced together, not hand pieced, I didn't hand sew it, but is pieced together. I'll give you a closer look in a second. What I started out with were these panel pieces. So the animals were a full panel. This black and white fabric up here, the stripes, that was the same fabric in the Men on Point quilt. Those stars had black and white striped fabric, and this is the same fabric there, so you can see how it's used in different ways. Then the white fabric is just fabric that I had on hand, so I pieced these rectangles together kind of randomly, and unfortunately some of them I had to get really close to the edge just because of the way that the panel worked out. So for example, this pig here has lots of like space and room between it, but then this chicken down here is like right up against the edge. So that's my only complaint with this. And then because, you know, I didn't totally know the direction I was going when I was initially making these black and white rectangles. Some of the stripes here, like the white on the top and the bottom, is much thinner than, you know, this white. But it doesn't bother me. I don't care at all, and I don't think anybody would notice unless I pointed it out. Now, the 2.5-inch squares, those came as a charm pack in the Missouri Star Quilt Company Advent box. One of the Advent Day gifts was a charm pack of solids, and a charm pack is 5-inch squares. So these were all solids from that. But unfortunately, I did run out of so I took the 5-inch squares and then I cut them in half, length and vertical. So they were 2.5-inch squares unfinished and then 2-inch squares finished. But I did run out of those, so I had to buy another charm pack, but it was close. I almost had enough, and I could have probably taken from my stash, you know, enough solids, but I just didn't have exactly what I wanted, so I got another charm pack of that. But let's take a closer look. So I'll show you the animals. I think the animals are just so fun, and that black and white stripe with it is just perfect. And this, the sheep is my favorite because the sheep just looks so grumpy, doesn't it? It's like, get out of here. Like all the other animals are kind of like having fun and doing their thing, and the sheep is just not wanting to participate. Here's the pig. It's so cute with its rosy cheeks. I did for the quilting, I did very minimal quilting on this, and I should actually go back and do more. I think the only quilting I have here is outlining this, which is not enough. The batting says to make sure to quilt at least 8 inches apart, and this is more than 8 inches. So I probably should go kind of around the pig and outline it, or maybe I could go along these. Same for the horse. I could outline the horse, or maybe do some quilting in the mane, but I always just tend to go with less quilting. And then I have random stitch in the ditch, kind of in random pieces on the checkerboard, the rainbow checkerboard. What other? We saw the pig, we saw the sheep, we saw the horse. I think there's one more. There should be a chicken. Oh, there's a chicken up here. So each animal has a big and a small. So here's the chicken, and I think the chicken has 2. Yeah, so the chicken has, and actually I think maybe all the animals have 2 little ones, but here's the chicken facing one direction, and then over here there's a chicken facing the other one, and you can see how close it gets to the edge there. It's just so right up on there. Then for the binding, I had this Tula pink stripe. So this stripe is a thicker stripe, obviously, than the one used in the bottom of the body of the quilt here. And I happen to have this polka dot on hand that I think is just perfect. So I am really happy with this quilt, and I think it will make some baby very happy. Or maybe it could go like in a kitchen or something. I don't know. Again, it's a little bit big for a wall hanging, but I don't really tend to make wall hangings. I like my quilts to be used on the body. Okay, we have one more. So it's funny that I just said that I don't make wall quilts, because I realized as I was hanging this up that this one is the new one and it is a wall quilt. Though I do have to say that I think it could be a baby quilt for the coolest baby in the world. I think you would have to be a very cool baby to have this be your baby quilt. But I hung up this deer quilt next to it because this wall hanging, first of all, I have a video on this wall hanging. It is one of the Watch What I Make with These Scraps video. I took the scraps from this deer quilt over here and made the wall hanging. I don't love the wall hanging. The deer quilt, on the other hand, so I'm not really showing you the deer quilt in full because I already showed that in a different trunk show. I think the trunk show was, that video was called Trunk Show 10 Quilts. So if you want to see that quilt in full, it's called Trunk Show 10 Quilts. What was I saying? I forgot. But I took the scraps from the deer quilt and made the baby hanging wall quilt. And I don't love the wall hanging. The deer quilt, on the other hand, I think is actually one of the best things I've ever made. So, you know, you can't win them all. But I do think that there's a lot of neat aspects to the wall hanging. You know, obviously it's very modern. The colors are interesting, though I like the colors better in the deer quilt than I like them, you know, in the wall hanging. But really, this was a very easy quilt. It may look a little challenging, but I just cut all of the leftovers into the biggest squares and rectangles that I could, and I would sew, you know, 2 similar sizes together and then square it off and then, you know, pair those with a bigger piece. Anyway, you can watch the video and see, but it was a really fun quilt to make. If you're looking for something very meditative, very easy, this is the kind of thing to make. It's very improv-like, I would say. But it is fun to see these 2 quilts next to each other. They're so different, yet using the exact same fabrics is really kind of neat to see. And I will say, with the deer quilt and those hourglasses going around the outside is kind of to die for. And then those black triangles right up against the edge. I just, you know, I think, and then the other thing I'll say, I think I might have said this in the Trunk Show 10 quilts video, but one of the very cool things about this one here is the circles. You can't really see because it doesn't go down far enough, but they make this diagonal, and just by chance I had put these diamonds as cornerstones, and the diamonds also are kind of on the diagonal. So you have these diagonals of circles and then these diagonals of diamonds. But we're not talking about this quilt today. We're talking about this one. So let me just give you a closer look. All flannel, and then I just added the sashing, not the sashing, what do you call that? The binding in the same black as the pieced part. Here's the thread I need to cut off. But you have the herringbone. This is kind of like a textured looking fabric. And then this burnt orange I just love. It just didn't seem to work as well in this piece, in my opinion, but still super cool. And then let's look at like one of the teeny tiny pieced. So this one's pretty small. So if you look at my thumb, that's a pretty small piece, but it was easy. It feels so good to finish a quilt, and I love hanging them up, looking at them, chatting about them with you all. So thank you for indulging me. All of these 3 quilts were made in 2023. I was trying to think if there were other quilts made in 2023, but I don't think so. I have a bunch of works in progress, and usually, you know, by this time of the year, I will have made a lot of quilts, but I just haven't. I have so many that are kind of in the works. So thank you for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.